We'll start with the most underappreciated members of the Pittsburgh Steelers. George Pickens tops that list, and at least topped it for Bleacher Report, who sparked this conversation for us, naming him the Steelers' most underappreciated guy. Quote, "It shouldn't be all that shocking if Pickens winds up in the discussion as a top 10 wide receiver in the league if he takes the next step in his third season." Pickens is on pace for that kind of start to his career. You look at George Pickens, I think it's an easy name to add to a list of underappreciated guys for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I got a couple more for you. Okay, let's start off with the conversation of George. Do you agree that he, in my opinion, he does top that list? I think he is number one, but there are close second and thirds and so on and so forth. Do you agree or disagree on that one?
I agree with that simply because you go into last season and a lot of people were saying, yeah, it's a 1-2 with Deontay Johnson, but when it comes to overall ability, talent, and ceiling, I think
Yeah.
George Pickens was always higher than Deontay Johnson. I think you knew the ceiling was always higher. The question was, is he ever going to achieve it with that quarterback, with that offensive coordinator? Well, now we have all different, scenarios going into this season, and I don't think anybody has really readjusted the expectations for George Pickens with that new quarterback system, with that new, offensive coordinator. So I think that there are still people that know that George Pickens is super talented, but I do
Yeah.
think that there's still a level that he hasn't reached yet that a lot of us don't give him credit for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talked yesterday about whether or not he could be a wide receiver one or the Steelers should view him as a wide receiver one, what questions he has to answer. I look at George as a guy that if he wasn't in the position, if the Steelers weren't in the position that they were in, if this was another team with less spotlight or fewer expectations, less pressure, I would say George Pickens might be looked as like the next great, crazy generational thing. If you put him on an average team where there are no headlines, because in Pittsburgh there are a billion headlines. It is all, you are not going to find a team or an organization who has less media presence than the Pittsburgh Steelers or more media presence than the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you're a team that's in a much smaller market that we're just talking about, how George Pickens is doing these crazy things, I think people are looking at George Pickens going, this guy might be nuts. In Pittsburgh, it's almost like a dampened, okay, yeah, he's going to be really good, but, you got to approach things with the sign of caution because there is so many expectations and the pressure is so high. So I look at it as, I agree with you. George is that guy, but I have other names, and I think the other names are right there with them. I'm going to drop a bit of a surprising one to start this list because I think the rest of my names here are more foreseen, but I got a big one. I got Alex Highsmith as my close number two, a guy that we're already talking about, Nick Herbig being the next superstar. What do you do if he's phenomenal? Do you get rid of Alex Highsmith? Are you already ready to move on? I mean, everybody was talking about pressure win rate or whatever Myles Garrett was supposedly so good at last season that he won Defensive Player of the Year. Alex Highsmith, I believe, was right there in a close second, maybe top five in that same statistical category. He's a guy that is great at pass rush, puts the pressure on, doesn't get to the quarterback as much as TJ Watt does, obviously, but opens up plenty of lanes. And you see the impact that he has for TJ Watt when he's on the field is a phenomenal run stuffer, is so good in the run game and is reliable. He's a guy that's out there all the time. Best ability is availability. He's that type of guy. I think Alex Highsmith is so overlooked for the Pittsburgh Steelers that we almost forget that he's a fourth-round pick from Charlotte that has turned into a very, very quality near Pro Bowl starter on the other side of TJ Watt. And if he's somewhere else, again, we're talking about how good Alex Highsmith is instead of comparing him to other guys on this team because he is surrounded by TJ Watt and potentially Nick Herbig and Cam Hayward and Minkah Fitzpatrick and everybody else. The other name before I drop my two kind of easy ones here is Patrick Queen, who I think we have not talked nearly enough about what he can do to this football team and how good he can make the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has been the missing piece to the puzzle for 5-6 years now. He's been the guy that the Steelers have desperately needed and have failed to find. And if he could come in here and be everything that they believe he could be, that he should be able to be, I mean, he's the difference maker for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Bigger than anybody else, I believe. Bigger than Joey Porter Jr.'s development, bigger than Minkah Fitzpatrick's bounce back. Patrick Queen is the total game changer for what the Steelers can do. I'll toss those two at you. Agree, disagree? Is Alex Highsmith, the first comment I saw was you got to trade him. Well, am I wrong there? Am I wrong by saying he's underappreciated?
And this might be too easy of a parallel, but whenever I hear Alex Highsmith, and earlier today I saw the video or the replay of him strip sacking Deshaun Watson in week 2.
Yeah.
And TJ Watt takes it in for a game winning touchdown. A play that I don't think anybody remembers, but also he started that game off with a pick 6. But
Yes.
It might be too easy of a comparison, but this just reeks of LaMarr Woodley, right? LaMarr Woodley was a great edge rusher, but he was opposite James Harrison. So everybody talked about Harrison, national media, national broadcast. Everybody wanted to talk about James Harrison, but LaMarr Woodley was an all-pro, a Pro Bowl type of edge rusher. Alex Highsmith has that capability. I don't know if he's quite, to the level of LaMarr Woodley at his peak, but man, he is certainly close. And this guy is a game changer when he can be. Now, a lot of people always say, well, he disappears every once in a while. It's hard to be an impact player from the edge every single game like TJ Watt does. But when Alex Highsmith turns it on, he can get up there and be as good as anybody and as dangerous as anybody off the edge.
Yeah, exactly. He needs to get into that 10 sack every single year category, but I think he could get there. At the same time, that's not what he does. Like, that's not his strongest suit. And I get it, he's an edge rusher, but when you have TJ Watt and even Nick Herbig, who specializes in pass rushing, you're okay to have an Alex Highsmith who's in here just a dominant run stuffer. Because if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's what you need to complement TJ Watt and Nick Herbig. I think it works out so perfectly. I love the comparison to LaMarr Woodley because it's very true. Like, LaMarr Woodley's career is over. You could talk to guys who grew up watching that Pittsburgh Steelers era who weren't 100% involved in that roster and just were casual fans. They wouldn't be able to tell you about LaMarr Woodley. They wouldn't be able to tell you about who he is and what he did. He was ridiculous. And I think Alex Highsmith has that same impact almost, but in different ways. And the fact that they could have a 3-headed monster at outside linebacker is so dangerous. And it's, again, thanks to Alex Highsmith and what he brings. And then obviously Patrick Queen. I got 2 more for you here. This one's probably the easiest one in the book, Keanu Benton. I mean, Keanu Benton is the other game changer. He is if Keanu Benton, everybody talks about Joey Porter Jr. Joey Porter Jr. is going to be phenomenal. He's going to be a superstar in the making, blah, blah, blah. Dude, Keanu Benton might be one day the best player out of that draft class. Like, he could be the next Cam Hayward. He could be the next dominant defensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers, dominant defensive player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Keanu Benton's going to be a monster. And he looks so fluid and natural out there. It's so easy. The other one's Pat Freiermuth, who we're going to talk about a couple of times throughout this show, I feel like. Pat Freiermuth is the guy who you are going to overlook him so much. I am so excited to see what he could do with an actual offensive coordinator. Pat Freiermuth is you want to talk about underappreciated, could have the biggest impact on this team. I think I might be tossing Pat Freiermuth on that list, at the top of that list.
Yeah, we're eventually going to get to X factors, and Pat Freiermuth, if he has a great season or a bad season, that could determine a lot about the Steelers offense this year. And I'm excited to see what he's able to do with a new offensive coordinator, because you look at last year, he had injuries. He only had 300 total yards. And a lot of the time it was because of his usage when he was even out on the field. So I'm interested to see what his usage is. It seems, at least from, helmets and shorts, it seems like they're trying to get him more involved in the passing game, at least early on, to try to get some chemistry with these new quarterbacks. And I'm hoping it leads to some more stuff down in fall.
Yeah, agreed. We haven't seen, it's the same argument George Pickens. Like, if you continue to read the Bleacher Report article, the next sentence is talking about how he hasn't had a quarterback, how his quarterbacks were Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph getting him the ball. Like, Pat Freiermuth was in the same way in an offense that didn't utilize the middle of the field with an offensive coordinator that I don't even think knew Pat Freiermuth existed. I think he was just like, oh man, tight ends. What are those things? I don't even know what those are. That's what he's dealing with. The upside there is massive between all those guys. I like talking underappreciated guys because I think the Steelers have a bunch of them this year. That's just, where you are. You build a defense, you build an offense with these big superstar names like Russell Wilson and Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then you fill it with everybody else. And that's, you look in the past, you brought up LaMarr Woodley. You could talk about both sides of the ball with a billion names like that throughout the year. I mean, Brett Kiesel, Aaron Smith, who's, I mean, potentially my top name on any of these underappreciated lists, and what he could have done. Ridiculous.
I was thinking James Ferrier too.
Oh, another one. But you could even keep going. Larry Foote,
down the line. That entire defense.
The entire defense. That's what I'm saying is you have, that's where the Steelers kind of find themselves this year. I'm not saying that they're going to be that good of a defense. I'm just saying that there are so many, you could go right down the list and say, that's an underappreciated guy. That's an underappreciated guy. That's an underappreciated guy. They're all there. And they, Lawrence Timmons, it's another great one. You know, they're all there. And I think the Steelers have the defense this year for certain.